All right, let's jump right in. I want you to consider a pretty wild idea, one that might just change how you see financial markets forever. What if the market isn't a super rational adult? What if it's actually a toddler?
So let's start with the big question, right? Why do markets panic? I mean, you've seen it. A crisis hits, and this huge, complicated system just seems to totally lose it. It gets emotional, it gets irrational, it panics. So why? What's actually going on there?
Well, believe it or not, the answer probably isn't hiding in some super complex financial model. It's actually in the wiring of the human brain. And not just any brain, specifically the brain of a little kid. And once you make that mental shift, everything about how markets behave starts to make a whole lot more sense.
Okay, so to really get this, we've got to take a quick look inside our own heads. We need to understand the two big systems that are constantly battling for control, the planner and the reactor. Now, you've probably heard this idea that our rational brain is in charge, that it just shuts down our emotions when it needs to. But that's not really how it works. It's more like a constant tug of war. You've got the prefrontal cortex, that's our planner. It's slow, it thinks about the future, but it's also kind of fragile. And then you have the limbic system, our reactor. It's lightning fast, it's all about right now, and believe me, it is tough under pressure.
And here is the absolute key. When things get really stressful, guess which one wins? Yep, the fast, robust limbic system takes over. That planner part of our brain, it's the first thing to go offline. So when you see someone panic selling, that's not just some random, irrational act. It's a completely predictable biological response. It's not a bug in the system, it's a feature that kicks in when we're totally overloaded. Okay, so with that in mind, we can actually map this brain structure right onto the market itself. Think of it like a stack. Way down at the bottom, you've got the brainstem. That's what's running your heartbeat, your breathing, all the stuff you don't think about. For the market, that's the deep plumbing, right? The clearing and settlement systems that have to work perfectly, every single millisecond. Then in the middle, you've got the emotional limbic system. That's market sentiment, fear, greed, the whole 9 yards. And way up top, the prefrontal cortex, our planner. That's like the central bank trying to make long-term policy. And here's the kicker. Each layer absolutely depends on the one below it being stable.
But here's where this whole analogy gets really interesting. We're not talking about a fully formed adult brain here. No, we're comparing the market to a brain that's still under construction.
And let's be super clear about this. A newborn's brain isn't a broken adult brain. It's a completely different operating system. It's optimized for one thing and one thing only: survival. And how does it survive? By getting a caregiver's attention. This idea is absolutely fundamental to where we're going with this.
You see, a brain actually wires itself from the back to the front. The basic survival stuff comes online first. Then comes the emotional reactor, the limbic system. And the very last thing to finish cooking? That's the prefrontal cortex, the part for planning and self-control. It's not fully done until you're about 25. So think about that. For years and years, you're walking around with a fully functional emotional engine, but the brakes are still being built.
So, how do those brakes get built? Well, it comes down to this simple but profound idea. You learn to self-soothe by being soothed. An infant has basically zero ability to calm itself down. It needs a caregiver to do it for them. You know, the holding, the rocking, the soothing voice. And after that happens thousands of times, the brain literally internalizes that pattern. It builds the wiring to do it for itself. That's co-regulation.
All right, we've got our neuroscience toolkit ready. Now for the fun part. Let's apply this directly to the market and see just how well it fits.
So this leads us to the million-dollar question, doesn't it? If the market is like a developing brain, then how old is it exactly?
Well, the diagnosis is in. The market is basically a toddler. We're talking somewhere between 18 months and maybe 4 years old, developmentally speaking. It can do some stuff, for sure, but it is nowhere near mature.
Let's take 2008 as a perfect example. A toddler, right? They get the idea of object permanence. They know mom still exists, even when she leaves the room. But do they have the emotional control to handle it? Nope, they scream. In 2008, the market knew future profits and cash flows still existed. But when Liquidity, the caregiver, suddenly walked out of the room, the market had a full-blown meltdown. Its regulatory circuits just collapsed into pure panic.
So you see, when the market flies off the handle, it's not really a design flaw. It's just a completely normal, predictable feature of being a toddler. The go circuits are firing on all cylinders, but the stop circuits, the brakes, they're still under construction. They're just not strong enough yet. And this completely reframes the role of the Federal Reserve, doesn't it? The Fed isn't the market's own rational brain. Nope. The Fed is the caregiver. It's providing that external soothing, that co-regulation. But, as this quote says, a too responsive Fed becomes the helicopter parent of financial markets. And we all know what happens with helicopter parenting, right? If you swoop in and fix every little problem, the kid never learns to handle things on their own.
Here's another classic toddler trait you see in the market, the pruning problem. A little kid's brain actually has way more connections than an adult brain. A big part of growing up is pruning away the connections you don't need to become more efficient. Well, the market today is just like that unpruned toddler brain. It's a dizzying web of complex connections, derivatives, all sorts of things. It's noisy, it's messy, and it's super prone to these runaway signals.
So if we accept this, that the global economy is basically a toddler, then the big question is, how do we parent it? What does this mean for what happens next?
Well, the first lesson is a tough one: patience. You just can't rush this stuff. You can't force a brain to develop faster, and you can't just write a bunch of new regulations and expect the market to suddenly mature. Real regulatory capacity, the internal kind, isn't written in a policy document. It's forged in the fire of real-world experience, through painful market cycles. It means letting the system get a few bumps and bruises so it can build its own shock absorbers.
This analogy basically gives us a what not to do guide for parenting the market. There are 3 big risks. First, too much stress too fast. That's not a learning experience, that's trauma. It just breaks the system. The second risk is maybe the one we're most guilty of: too little stress. That's the helicopter parent again. We rescue it from everything so it never learns. And the third, and maybe the most damaging, is having an unpredictable caregiver. An inconsistent central bank creates this anxious, needy market that's just obsessed with what the parent is going to do next, instead of learning to think for itself.
So in the end, looking at markets this way really changes the whole conversation. We spend so much time being shocked and outraged when markets act like, well, toddlers. But maybe that's the wrong way to look at it. The question isn't why aren't markets rational? The real question we should be asking ourselves is this: are we actually giving them a chance to grow up?